Good evening, everybody, and welcome to From Anguish to Action, the Jewish Community Conference supporting the Uyghurs. My name is Joel Kenigsberg. I'm the Rabbi of Magen Avot Synagogue in Hendon, and I'm honored to be introducing tonight's conference. I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody who has worked tirelessly to ensure that this event could take place, to the entire team at Magen Avot, as well as to the other supporting synagogues at Muswell Hill and Hampstead, to the team at the United Synagogue led by Richard Verba on the technical, the broadcast, and the promotional side of tonight's event, the Jewish News, our official media partner, as well as our generous sponsors, including the Chief Rabbi Center for Community Excellence, World Jewish Relief, and Yad Vashem UK. I want to thank you all for your support in making this happen, and thank all of you that are watching right now, all of you at home who've taken the time to join us tonight for such an important cause. We have a dizzying array of speakers who will be joining us tonight. And I think that very fact, just looking at who will be addressing us tonight from such diverse backgrounds, should highlight what an important issue this is, what a cross-communal issue this is, and a matter of concern for all of us. I mentioned at the outset, this conference is titled the Jewish Community Conference Supporting the Uyghurs, but of course, not all of our speakers are Jewish. I'm sure not all of our audience is either. This is not just a Jewish issue. This is a human issue. And as the evidence becomes clearer of the suffering, of the atrocities, indeed of the genocide that is being perpetrated against the Uyghurs in China, we simply cannot remain silent. We need to speak up. We need to cry out. But more than that, we need to act. And that's what tonight's conference is all about, going from anguish to action. So the format for tonight will be 3 panel discussions, each one taking a different area in terms of how we can respond to this issue, looking at the religious and ethical and moral imperative, looking at political action, and looking at effective consumer protest. And so without further ado, let's begin. For the opening words, I'm honored to introduce the Chief Rabbi, Rabbi Ephraim Mirvis.
Good evening, everyone. At the outset, I would like to congratulate everyone responsible for organizing this significant event. For me and my office, it is an honor for us to be associated with the From Anguish to Action conference. I'd like to extend a particular yasher koach congratulations to Julian Pollard and his team. Thank you so much, not just for having the dream, but for translating it this evening into reality. This event benefits from a very impressive array of guest speakers, people who are willing to speak out for truth, for what is right, and for constructive action. And included in the lineup is Imam Qari Asim, whom I would like to congratulate for his truly outstanding interfaith activity. The Bible in the book of Exodus describes how Moses at the burning bush was appointed by God to be the leader of the Israelite nation, to go back to Egypt and to take the Israelites therefrom. But what immediately preceded the appointment of Moses? How does the Bible describe the qualities of leadership which he had, as a result of which he merited that appointment? In the passage immediately preceding it, we are told how Moses, an Israelite, was raised in the Egyptian palace of King Pharaoh. And when he was old enough, he went out to seek his brethren. On one occasion, he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a fellow Israelite to the extent that had Moses not intervened, the Israelite would have died. But to save the Israelite, Moses struck the Egyptian. He buried his body. On the following day, it was obvious to him that the news was out. Pharaoh himself heard what Moses had done, and he needed to flee for his life. He came to the land of Midian, and there the Bible takes us immediately to a scene at a wellside. Moses arrives, and he sees that the lady shepherds are being ignored, and instead the male shepherds are tending to their flocks. First come, first served doesn't apply there. Moses saw this injustice. He stood up for the women shepherds, and he himself watered their flocks. As a result, they came home early that day. Their father, Jethro, said, "How is it possible that you're so early?" They said, "There's a new man in town." And Moses was then introduced to Tzipporah, daughter of Jethro, whom he married. And it is at that point that the Bible tells us Moses went out to tend the flocks of Jethro. He came to the burning bush, and the rest, as they say, is all history. For me, there is a very powerful and eternally relevant message here. What makes a great Jewish leader? First of all, like Moses, we need to care about our fellow Jews. When we see an injustice being carried out towards other Jews, we must stand up to be counted. We must fight for the rights of our fellow Jews. And we must guarantee the safety of all Jewish people around the globe, particularly during trying and challenging times. But that's not our only responsibility. From that scene in Egypt, the Bible immediately transports us to the well side in Midian. And from Moses, we learn that we have an equally important responsibility to stand up for the rights of others. Moses in Midian was defending the rights of people he had never ever met before. He was an outsider. Indeed, even his life was in danger at that point, had his identity become fully known. Nonetheless, that didn't stop him from doing what was right for total strangers whose rights were being denied. And it is this very recognition which enabled Moses to become our great leader. And if we are to emulate his ways, we likewise must look after our own and also be sensitive to the needs and requirements of everybody right around the world. For indeed, in the book of Genesis, we are taught that every human being is created in the image of Almighty God. It is in this very spirit that this conference has been planned this evening. We care about the welfare and the needs, indeed the lives and well-being of so many Uyghurs in China today. Our own past experiences of horror make us as Jews all the more sensitive to the needs and desperate situation of others, as a result of which, like Moses, we need to stand up to be counted in order that we can try our best to do something to help. And what I like about the title is we're not just recognizing the anguish that is being experienced at this time, we need to engage in action. Thank you so much, all of you, for being part of the event this evening. I have no doubt whatsoever that this evening's proceedings will contribute, even in a small way, towards the overall global effort to do something constructive and meaningful in order to change the situation in China, in order that the future of the Uyghurs will hopefully be bright. Have a good evening, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Chief Rabbi, for those powerful and poignant words. And now I have the pleasure of chairing our first session. The topic of session 1 is Interfaith and Ethical and Moral Imperatives. And we have quite an esteemed panel of speakers before us. I'm going to briefly introduce each of our speakers. And following that, I'm going to ask each one of them in turn, one by one, please to just, for the first 5 minutes, tell us a little bit about how you are involved with this issue and giving us a little bit of your opening perspective. So first of all, we have Imam Qari Asim, MBE, with us this evening. Imam Asim is the senior Imam at the Makkah Mosque in Leeds. Under his leadership, the mosque has won a number of awards, including being voted the UK's model mosque. He's also a senior lawyer at a global law firm, and he's well known for his interfaith work, having led a number of groundbreaking initiatives to bridge the gap between communities. We also have Benedict Rogers, representing Christian solidarity worldwide. Benedict is a British human rights activist and journalist based in London. His work focuses primarily on Asia, and he's a regular contributor to many print journals, as well as having appeared online on many TV stations and radio channels as well. And he's also an advisor to the World Uyghur Congress. We also have joining us Rahima Mahmut from the World Uyghur Congress, who on an evening like this I'm sure needs no introduction. Rahima is a London-based Uyghur singer, award-winning translator and human rights activist. She's very well known in the Jewish community and beyond for her work in highlighting this important issue and sharing from her personal perspective, and we look forward to hearing from her as well. We also have Henry Grunwald, OBE, QC, who's the head of World Jewish Relief and the former president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. Henry is a vice president of the Jewish Leadership Council, and he was awarded the OBE in 2009 for his services to the Jewish community and interfaith relations. And finally, we have Rabbi Dr. Michael Harris of Hampstead Synagogue. Rabbi Harris has published articles in many scholarly journals, as well as in newspapers, including The Guardian and the Jewish Chronicle. He's taught on BA and MA programs at King's College London. He's formerly an affiliated lecturer in the Faculty of Divinity in Cambridge. He's a regular speaker in many synagogues, the annual Limud Festival, JW3, and other venues within the Jewish community and abroad. So thank you all for joining us and for being on this panel tonight. I think to begin with, we'll turn to you, Rahima. And thank you for being here tonight. And could you just, for 5 minutes, tell us a little bit about your perspective on this issue?
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I am extremely moved by Chief Rabbi's speech earlier, and I would like to take this opportunity, thank the Jewish friends for taking this issue very seriously. And for the last 2 years, I cannot believe the amount of people that we have managed to mobilize and fighting to stop the Uyghur genocide. I am Uyghur, and I left my country in 2000 after a massacre happened in my city of Khulja in 1997. And I always hoped that one day I would be able to return home, things might get better. But however, I was never able to return home. And then from 2017, January, I completely forcibly cut off from all my family members and friends from my hometown of Khulja and in the region, the East Turkestan. At the moment, people already, hopefully already know that what is happening is the largest internment since the Holocaust. Up to 2 to 3 million Uyghurs and other Muslims are interned in this, the so-called re-education camps, in fact, are concentration camps. Recently, I have translated for a tribunal, the Uyghur tribunal that was took place in June from the 4th till the 7th, and the account of the witnesses is absolutely harrowing. And from the Chinese own aim, from their leaked documents, it said very clearly, their aim is break the Uyghurs' lineage, break their roots, break their connections, and break their origins. And the horrific testimonies I witnessed and translated for the Uyghur tribunal confirmed the extreme heights that religious persecution has reached in my homeland. And one academic gave evidence on state documents that described Uyghurs as rats and Islam as virus and a mental illness. An ex-policeman from the camp testified that who worked in the region, and testified that Uyghurs were arrested because the Chinese state automatically considered them as terrorists. He also described how once in the camps, those accused of religious crimes faced routine torture. He testified that in order to force Uyghurs to reject their religion, some had their limbs were tied and water pipes were inserted in their mouths to force water into their lungs. And women from the tribunal too shared harrowing stories, accounts of forced labor, rape, forced sterilization, and marriages. And there are even accounts of organ harvesting. And I am extremely pleased that we bring everyone together today, very powerful speakers, to discuss not only the anguish, but the action. So I would like to say that for my call for today, 3 actions I would like people to do. One, write to your MP to vote for the diplomatic boycott motion, which will be voting on Thursday next week. And second, follow us on social media and join the campaign. And third, I would ask you to avoid products of slave labor, Chinese cotton, Zara, Uniqlo, and the high-tech companies involving in surveillance, high-tech surveillance like Huawei. Thank you very much.
Rahima, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I'm sure it's not easy to talk about these things from such a close personal perspective. It's always extremely moving to hear you speak. And as you say, those harrowing accounts. And we really hope that this evening will be part of the global effort to really change things and to change things for you and for your people for the better. We'll now introduce our second panelist for the session, Imam Qari Asim.
Thank you. I would like to begin by thanking the Magen Avot Synagogue for hosting this significant conference, along with other partners in support of the Uyghur Muslims. May I also take this opportunity to express my deep gratitude to the Jewish community in general, and in particular, the Chief Rabbi Mirvis, who is an extraordinary Jewish leader and a bridge builder between communities. And I would like to thank the Jewish community for its sustained effort in raising the voice against the ethnic cleansing of Uyghur Muslims. After the unfathomable mass atrocity, the Holocaust, we said never again. Never again would we allow ethnic cleansing and the systematic persecution of a people. But we have said never again too many times now, and have stood by and watched persecution play out like Rwanda and Srebrenica genocides, and now the Uyghurs. There are reports of concentration camps, as Rahima mentioned. Over 1 million Uyghur and ethnic minorities are forcibly detained in China. Restrictions on religious freedoms, forced imprisonment, forced labor, sterilization of women, organ harvesting, the separation of children from their parents, and a culture of intimidation and fear have become the norm for Uyghurs. Yet the international community, by and large, remains relatively silent in challenging the campaign against freedom of religion and belief and freedom of movement of Uyghurs. However, the title of today's conference, From Anguish to Action, urges us to do more to combat deliberate and systematic brutality and persecution of Uyghurs. We know from our rich religious traditions that neither our father, Prophet Abraham, nor prophets Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad remained silent in the face of atrocities and injustices committed against communities. And I'm proud to say that the Chief Rabbi very eloquently mentioned the beautiful story of how Prophet Moses stood up against injustices that were happening in respect of those shepherds. And I can relate to that tradition, as the similar tradition is contained in the Quran. And the Quran also goes on to say, urging us to act rather than just leave it at condemning something. The Quran says in chapter 4, verse 135, "O you who believe, be upholders of justice, witness for God Almighty, even though it goes against your own interests." So there is an internal lesson, an extremely important lesson for us, that we must speak out, even if it goes against our personal and economic interests. The responsibility to act is brought into sharp focus this week. Today, July 11th, marks the 26th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide. Srebrenica genocide took place just a quarter of a century ago. And it took the lives of more than 8,000 Muslim men and boys and is considered as the worst atrocity on European soil since World War II. The world must not fail Uyghurs as it did with Srebrenica Muslims. I hope that at today's important conference, we can come together to realize that we must do more. Our similarities and shared values and identity surpasses our differences. For Muslims, it's so reassuring to constantly have the support and value of other faith communities, in particular the Jewish community, because whatever our faiths or experiences, it's important we use these moments to stand together shoulder to shoulder. We must learn the lessons of history to help tackle hatred, and anti-Muslim sentiments and anti-Semitism are on the rise, and they continue to challenge our communities, and we must challenge those who continue to spread hatred against our respective communities. Racism and demonization in whatever form and against whoever is something that's stain on humanity. The political leadership of the world must take decisive and robust actions to stop the genocide of Uyghur minority community, but also stop the hatred against our respective communities. Doing nothing to stop injustice or persecution is not an option for humanity. Our religions and moral compass urges us to stand up for justice and play our part. In our lifetime, we have witnessed that whenever ordinary people speak out, even when the victims are suffering on the other side of the world, change eventually occurs. That is how we can bring change for Uyghur Muslims. As followers of Abrahamic faiths, we must all speak out if we see hatred, intolerance, and racism, and encourage those in positions of influence and power to do the same. We must continue to urge our political leadership, but also as children of Abraham, when we stand together, we send out a strong and clear message to all those who would threaten human dignity, no matter how big and mighty they may be. So today's event is a significant conference in which various communities have come together to say that enough is enough and we must not tolerate the persecution and genocide of Uyghurs. Thank you.
Thank you, Imam Asim, and let me thank you and let me commend you as well for speaking out as you have done, and for speaking out as you do courageously against hatred and against injustice, against your community, against our communities, against communities worldwide. And there's something very moving tonight about being here together, representatives of different faiths. But as you say, certainly on this issue, our common ground is much greater than the differences between us. And we hope we can work together to fight against this injustice. Our third speaker for the panel tonight is Benedict Rogers, human rights activist.
Good evening. Well, it's a very great privilege to be at this very important conference and to speak alongside the other very distinguished speakers. And I want to start by thanking the Magen Avot Synagogue for organizing this. It is both timely and well-timed, and I want to congratulate you for both. It's timely because there are a number of things that have just happened and are about to happen in Parliament, which I'll say a bit more about in a few moments. And so this event is particularly timely, but it's also very well timed, if I may say so, fitting it in between most of the Wimbledon final and ahead of the big match tonight. So congratulations on that. And I also want to say a big thank you to the Jewish community as a whole for your leadership on this issue, from the Chief Rabbi, who we just heard from and who I know has spoken out on a number of other occasions, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, Jewish News, many rabbis, and my own hero, the much loved and much missed former Chief Rabbi, Rabbi Lord Sachs. So thank you to all of you for your important leadership on this. I want to highlight two key points for you to take away from this event. The first is the importance of interfaith action, and I entirely agree with and salute what Imam Qari Asim has just said, the importance of interfaith action, and then what action is needed. On the importance of interfaith action, I think it is incredibly important that people of different faith communities, and indeed people of no faith, recognize that this is one of the greatest contemporary injustices and tragedies, mass atrocities of our time. And it's something that affects our common humanity and that all of us should engage with. And that is happening. In August last year, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, led a statement signed by over 75 leaders of both religious and belief communities. That statement included Imam Qari Asim and other imams, the president of the Buddhist Society, the representative of the Dalai Lama, the chief executive of Humanists UK, 7 Anglican bishops and a number of other Anglican priests, the Catholic cardinals of Myanmar and Indonesia, and the former master of the Catholic Dominican order, Father Timothy Radcliffe, and Bishop Declan Lang on behalf of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales, and about 20 rabbis. And that, I think, was a very significant statement. It was followed up just last month ahead of the G7 summit in Cornwall with a similar letter from religious leaders and an event hosted on the sidelines of the G7 by the Bishop of Truro and the Coptic Orthodox Archbishop of London, Archbishop Angelos. And I know Rahima and others spoke at that. And next week in Washington, D.C., there's an International Religious Freedom Summit where I know that the Uyghur genocide will feature highly. There are 2 Christian leaders, and I can say this as a Christian myself, as a Catholic and a former Anglican, 2 of the world's Christian leaders who have yet to speak out, Pope Francis and the Archbishop of Canterbury. And I certainly am doing everything I can. I've written about this quite widely, and I'm doing everything I can respectfully to encourage them that the time has come for their voices to be heard as well. But let me go on to what action is needed, because statements are important, and statements from religious leaders are very important because they send the moral message about the need for action. But the question is, what action do we take? And it's worth remembering that the genocide is being increasingly recognized. The previous US administration and the current US administration have recognized it as a genocide. The Canadian, Belgian, Lithuanian, Czech, and British parliaments have recognized it as a genocide, and an independent tribunal, the Uyghur Tribunal, chaired by the barrister who prosecuted Slobodan Milosevic, is underway to further investigate the claims of genocide. Last week, the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee published a very important report titled Never Again, the UK's responsibility to act on atrocities in Xinjiang and beyond. And it sets out a range of recommendations. And I strongly agree with Rahima's call to write to your MPs. I would urge you to write to your MPs to encourage them to press the government to adopt the recommendations of the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee report and to look up that report, which just came out last Thursday. But also, as Rahima has said, this coming Thursday, Tim Lawton MP has a motion in the House of Commons calling for, firstly, the Winter Olympics in 2022, which are due to be held in Beijing, to be moved to a different country, a country where human rights are respected and protected. But if that can't happen, it calls for the British government to impose a diplomatic boycott, that no government officials, royalty, VIPs, diplomats should attend any of the ceremonies or functions associated with the Olympics. And I would go further to encourage a corporate boycott, a boycott by sponsors, and a consumer boycott. But you can write in the next day or two, anytime before Thursday, to your MP to ask them to support that motion. And you can find information about that on the website of the organisation yet again. So let me just close by thanking you once again for this opportunity. And I leave you with the words which echo Imam Qari Asim's remarks, the words of the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee report, which in its opening section ends with the following. After every major atrocity and tragedy, the world says never again. It is happening again, and it is not too late to act. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Ben, for your, for your remarkable and tireless work on this and bringing together such a diverse array of people and leaders in order to speak out, and as you say, in order to act. You mentioned some of the diplomatic initiatives, and in the second session, we'll be hearing a lot more about those as well. We've got some MPs who will be joining us this evening, and I'm sure we'll hear more about those initiatives in greater detail. Let me just remind our listeners and viewers that if you do have questions for any of our panelists, you can submit them. As you can see now on your screen, there's an email address, hello@theus.tv, or if you're watching on Facebook, you can put it in the comments, and time permitting, we'll be able to put those questions to our panelists as well. Moving on now to our next panelist, the former president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, Henry Grunwald, OBE.
Rabbi Kenigsberg, thank you very much. And friends, this is a really important event, and let me echo what's been said by way of gratitude to those who've organized it. I'm the son of a refugee. My late father landed in this country on the 4th of August 1939, 1 month before war broke out, from Czechoslovakia, and was allowed in as a racial refugee. He was the lucky one of his very large family, almost all of whom were murdered in the Holocaust. I'm now president of World Jewish Relief, an organization which began its life in 1933 as the Central British Fund for German Jewry. It helped some 60,000 refugees get into this country from 1933, before, during, and after the Second World War. Then we helped refugees because they were Jewish. Now we help refugees because we are Jewish. We recognize the responsibility that we as Jews have, not only to our fellow Jews, as the Chief Rabbi said, but also to others in need. And over the years of our existence, we've helped many thousands of refugees of all faiths and of none all over the world. 1 year ago, last July, satellite imagery emerged showing Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang kneeling, blindfolded as they waited to be led onto trains. The resonance of this footage with our own history, the images of the trains being loaded in particular, shook the Jewish community and made it impossible for anyone to ignore. Our collective memory of our own history is so powerful that leaders of our community across the religious and political spectrum felt a duty publicly to highlight and condemn the treatment of Uyghur Muslims at a time when much of the rest of the world failed to raise their voices and join our condemnation. We've heard, and Rahima, I want to thank you not only for speaking to us tonight, but for the interview you gave with World Jewish Relief recently. We've heard what's happening on the ground in China. Defenders of the Chinese actions say that what is happening is not genocide. Well, my friends, we know that genocide doesn't begin with mass extermination. Genocide never just happens. There is always a set of circumstances which occur or are created to build the climate in which genocide can take place. It's now generally accepted that there are 10 stages of genocide, beginning with classification, moving through symbolization to discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, and extermination, followed by denial. There can be no doubt that what the Chinese government refers to as re-education puts the Uyghurs' culture, religion, and way of life at risk of extinction. And I don't know which of the stages of the 10 stages of genocide we've reached. But I do know that we cannot afford to wait until legal definitions are agreed before doing what we can to help. The world should unanimously condemn what is happening in China, and our voices, all of our religious voices, should be heard loudly in that condemnation. But condemnation is not enough. Our religion unambiguously advocates that to be a bystander in the face of human suffering is tantamount to perpetrating injustice yourself. So inaction is not an option for us as Jews. And that's why World Jewish Relief, realizing the difficulties of helping the persecuted in China itself because of the nature of Chinese society, recently launched an appeal to raise funds. The appeal remains open on our website to raise funds to assist some 6,000 of the most vulnerable Uyghur refugees in Turkey who face daily challenges and live in fear of internment. And our community has responded magnificently, because we as Jews know that this is assistance we must provide to these refugees in need. So as a humanitarian organization, we provide practical assistance to those refugees to try and improve their lives, as that is an imperative for us, to provide psychological support for those who need it, to provide legal support for those who need it, to provide medical support and services to those who need it, to provide language classes for children. In Turkey, language classes not only in Turkish, but also in their own language, to provide assistance to women with handicraft skills to develop them and market them, to support themselves and their families, and of course, to provide food packages to those who need it. All of that is a religious and ethical imperative, and that is why we do it. I want to raise one important and connected matter about refugees and asylum seekers in general. This conference is a great initiative, and I'm sure that all of us, apart from trying to help the Uyghurs in China and refugees in other parts of the world, would wish to assist any Uyghurs seeking asylum in the United Kingdom. I don't want to introduce party political issues into this evening, because the Uyghur case has had amazing support from right across the political spectrum. United Kingdom law at present makes it an offence for someone who knowingly and for gain facilitates the arrival or the entry or attempted entry into this country of an individual whom he knows or has reasonable cause to believe that that individual is an asylum seeker. The new Nationality and Borders Bill presented by the Home Office seeks to remove the words "and for gain" from the offence. So a law aimed at people smugglers raising money from the most unfortunate in the world, a law aimed at them in the past, would make it an offence for anyone who not for gain facilitates the entry or attempted entry into this country of an asylum seeker. And if passed, it would appear to mean that someone like the late Sir Nicholas Winton, who facilitated the arrival of many Jewish children here on kinder transport, could have been criminalized, and that any of us who, because it is the right thing to do, facilitated the entry of a Uyghur asylum seeker into the UK could have committed a criminal offence. And so I hope that if the bill is presented to Parliament in its current form, politicians from all parties will ensure that the words "for gain" are not removed. So to conclude, let us ensure that we do the right thing by the Uyghur community at this critical moment. We cannot stand by in the face of human suffering. Our religion requires us to respond to their plight. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you for those powerful words and for those powerful actions. It is inspiring to hear the way that you have drawn on our collective memory and our collective experience as a people in order to go and to help others and really to alleviate suffering wherever we can do so. And we now move on to our final panelist for the session, Rabbi Dr. Michael Harris.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kenigsberg, and thank you all friends for joining us for this most important event, and sincere thanks to all those who have been involved in arranging the conference, and particularly Magen Avot for leading this wonderful initiative in which it's a privilege to be involved. Friends, I just want to echo what all the previous panelists in this session have said from the perspective of one absolutely central and key Jewish thinker, termed by some the most famous Jew of the medieval era, namely Maimonides, who we refer to in Jewish tradition as Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, Rabbi Moshe, the son of Maimon. And Maimonides, in his magnum opus, his great code of Jewish law, the Mishnah Torah, really crystallizes some of the observations which have been made by the distinguished speakers on our panel this evening. Maimonides says in chapter 9 of Laws of Servants in his great code that Jewish people, having received the Torah, have a very deep obligation to be compassionate, and not just to be compassionate, but he says in the Hebrew, Rachmanim al hakol, compassionate towards everyone, towards all of creation. And then he adds something which appears at first sight to be just a repetition, but in fact is getting at something much deeper. What Maimonides adds in that chapter is that being compassionate, we fulfill the religious obligation, the commandment of the Torah, of imitatio Dei, of imitating the ways of God. And God is compassionate. As one of the verses in the Hebrew Bible says, V'rachamav al kol ma'asav, God's mercies extend to his entire creation. And when we are commanded to be compassionate, we are commanded to do so by imitating God, who is compassionate. And that is extremely significant, because one might be compassionate by following, as it were, a rule book, by looking up, by consulting experts, consulting books. When is it that one should act compassionately? But when we are told by our tradition to imitate God, who is compassionate, that means we have to work on ourselves to take on compassion as a characteristic, that being compassionate becomes an automatic part of our character, so that when we witness oppression and the suffering of others, we automatically, out of our very compassionate nature, cannot stand by and step in. It's what contemporary philosophers call virtue ethics. It's not the ethics just of action, it's the personality, the moral personality that we must develop inside ourselves. And once we become compassionate people, people of compassionate character, then it follows automatically, as Maimonides says, that our compassion extends to all of humanity and to all of creation. Because it is impossible for a person who has a genuinely compassionate nature to restrict his or her compassion to a certain portion of humanity or a certain portion of creation. We are to become compassionate people, emulating God's compassionate character. And if we do that, then automatically our compassion extends to everyone. And so within Jewish teaching, as the previous speakers have highlighted, we have an ethical reach that is global. We are extremely proud in the Jewish community, as other communities rightly are proud in other faiths, of their own traditions. We are fiercely proud of our distinctive particular tradition. But that very tradition teaches that from that matrix of a particular strong cultural and religious identity, we must reach out and embrace all of those who are created in the image of God, the entire human family. And there is perhaps no portion of that family. That requires our help, our support, and our action more than the Uyghur community in China. And finally, let me say it's not just compassion. Next Sunday, a week from today, is the fast of the 9th of Av, commemorating the destruction of the temples, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. But as is typical in Jewish tradition, we try and focus on hope as well. And in the prophetic reading from Isaiah, this coming Shabbat, this coming Sabbath, we'll say in our synagogues the verse Tzion b'mishpat tipadeh v'shaveh b'tzedakah, that Zion will be redeemed and the tragedy of the destruction of Jerusalem will be reversed, but only through justice and through righteousness. And as much as compassion, the Jewish and ethical imperatives of justice and righteousness compel us to do whatever we can to help the Uyghur community. So friends, thank you all so much for joining us. And it is a great privilege to be working together with members of the Jewish community and members of other faith communities and a wide spectrum of men and women of goodwill to do whatever we can to improve the plight of the Uyghur community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Harris. Thank you for those inspiring words, looking at some of the philosophical, I suppose, theological underpinnings of, what should be so self-evident about the responsibility and the imperative that we all do have to show compassion and to, to support and to fight against injustice wherever it is. Thank you. So it's really been, we've just got all our panelists back with us now. It's really been an inspiring 45 minutes. Certainly for me, it is a privilege to be here in this company and to have heard from you all. I think, we all agree, and having heard, such powerful words and from all of the speakers, we all agree on the ethical imperative. We all agree on the religious imperatives. We all agree that whatever our faiths are, we have very much common ground here. I think you've all mentioned the fact that it's not just about speaking, but it's also about action as well. So I guess the question is, we've mentioned some broad initiatives on a communal level, as Jewish, Muslim, Christian communities together. What is there that can be done on an interfaith level? How can we bring our communities together in order to work on this issue, in order to to raise the awareness and really to promote all the things which you've spoken about? Imam Asim, maybe we'll begin with you.
Thank you so much. I think firstly, just elaborating on what all the speakers have said, that we have a lot more in common than that which divides us. And it's extremely important that we symbolically show that we stand together, because I think that in itself carries a huge power. And also when you speak for the other, if you like, because we are living in a culture where it's become normalized to other, those communities that perhaps or groups that are not of the same ilk or the same thinking or the same background, and therefore it becomes extremely powerful when you stand up against injustices or intolerance towards the other. Just to give you an example, so in Leeds, not long ago, we held a conference whereby we had three faith leaders, and the Jewish faith leader spoke about the anti-Muslim hatred, and I, as an Imam, spoke about anti-Semitism, so standing in the shoe of the other, and the Christian leader spoke about the persecution of the Jewish community over the centuries. So, and it was very powerful, and I think young people took something away from that actually it becomes extremely pertinent and powerful when you speak, when you stand in the shoe of the other, to help people realize what's happening around the world. I sometimes say that, well, if in a sentence, if you just change the word if you're speaking about the other community, and if you change the word like a Muslim to a Jew or a Jew to a Christian, and if you are from that same community, how would you feel about it? And so I think, just to conclude, I'll say that it's very symbolic when we stand together, but then people take more notice of what we want to say collectively.
Thank you. If any of our other panelists would like to comment on that.
Just to build on what the Imam has said, a Uyghur Muslim would be expected to speak out publicly against what is happening in China. His or her voice will be heard. But if alongside him or her, you have people of other faiths, if that Uyghur Muslim stands alongside a Jew, stands alongside a member of a Christian denomination, then the voices become more powerful. And the chances of their being listened to increase exponentially the more from different communities we can bring together with the same message.
Can I briefly, just very briefly, I agree entirely with Imam Qari, Asim, and with Henry. And just to further build on what they have said, I think there are four things that we could all do. The first is to continue to speak together and stand together. The second is to disseminate that message to our communities. So, for example, the statement issued in August last year by over 75 religious leaders that I mentioned earlier, in future, if there are statements like that, to make sure our communities know about that. And then finally, I think there are two concrete things that we can do together kind of as our respective communities. One is spiritual and the other is activist. I think in our different traditions, we all have diverse ways of doing this, but I think all of us in our different ways can pray for the Uyghurs, pray for China as a whole, and then secondly, mobilize our communities to do the things that Rahima and I outlined in terms of writing to MPs. So those are four thoughts to complement what's already been said.
Thank you, Ben. I think that's a really important point as well. I think we would be amiss if we had a session on, religious imperatives and we didn't mention prayer. Certainly, coming from the Jewish perspective within our tradition, it's very much a part of our liturgy is that we look, not only inwards, but we most definitely look outwards and look towards the suffering. And that is certainly something that we are becoming more aware of in our community, and I think others as well. As was mentioned before, we're on somewhat of a tight schedule. We still have another 2 sessions to come this evening. So I'm going to, at this point, ask you to wrap it up. Where each of the speakers will have an opportunity to just two minutes to give us any closing thoughts, any other comments you'd like to make about that which has been said, which has already been deeply inspiring. So Rahima.
I cannot thank, Magnavot and many other organizers came together to do this event. It's so moving, and for me, as being an Uyghur who is suffering from this atrocity, from this genocide, not knowing what happened to all my loved ones back home, and also hearing people sometimes just deny that or even a doubt about this is happening in this 21st century. And I think it is so important that people come together regardless of the background that we speak and tell the truth, show support. Often people question me, China is so powerful, there is nothing people can do, nothing can stop them. And that really make me sometimes quite angry. I try not to become angry. I try to, show strength and also believe in hope. I think the hope is extremely important for Uyghurs now survive. At the moment, anything more than survive is kind of luxury, especially people inside inside East Turkestan, the Uyghur region, the so-called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So therefore, each of you today, that what you said is important, and it will make change. We must believe that will make change. And thank you so much. And I do believe this darkness will, end one day. But it has to be people like you, more people, all faith must, take this on and show compassion and do whatever they can to stop this genocide. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahima. Certainly, I don't think anybody watching can remain indifferent after hearing those words. Rabbi Harris.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kenigsberg. And thank you, Rahima, for another very powerful set of words. And again, thanks to everyone. I just want to pick up on something that Benedict said. You mentioned your hero, late Chief Rabbi Sachs, of blessed memory. Rabbi Sachs has an extraordinarily powerful piece in one of his essays on the Torah, in which he talks about the two faces of evil. That evil faces outwards and, of course, does great harm to those who are victims of evil. But also evil has a terrible impact on the perpetrators of evil. And when you talk about prayer, Benedict, perhaps we can find room in our hearts to pray for those in China who are perpetrating these terrible actions against the Uyghur community, that they should have a change of heart, to try and make them understand that they are doing evil, terrible evil to the Uyghur community, but also evil to themselves. And I noticed in the chat we have a question from my friend and our congregant, Gabriel Herman, who asks about reminding the Chinese about how they protected Jews during the Second World War. I'm not an expert on the history of China in the Second World War, but of course everyone knows that China was a great civilization, and it is a country with such a role in world history. And perhaps part of our prayer and part of our public advocacy might be to try and say to China, we need you to act in the best traditions of your own history. We need you to reflect on the damage that you are doing, not just to others, but to yourselves, so that we can move forward, as Rahima put it, from dark situation, please God, to one of hope and of light. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Harris. Imam Asim, if I can ask you in just 2 minutes, your concluding thoughts.
Thank you. Just a couple of points. I think firstly, sometimes we can become very hopeless and feel that there's nothing that we can do because the opponent is so powerful, so mighty. But we have seen in our own lifetimes how change can happen. And change happens when people come together, not only just to condemn, but also take small acts of, sometimes small acts of kindness towards the victims. Other times it's about upholding justice. So today's conference, I hope, will provide us with an opportunity to reflect on our personal and professional lives, to show that those who raise a voice against prejudice, hatred of the other and racism, those who stand up and unite against hatred can and will make a difference. It's never been so important for people to be empowered to confront hatred in the world, to build bridges that help create a stronger, better and more cohesive world for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Henry?
One brief point. I said when I gave the definition of the 10 stages of genocide that stage 10 was denial. And it is, looking back on what people have done. But denial is very much in the fore of what the Chinese government is doing at the moment. And we know that they seek to present what they are doing as a method of dealing with terrorism, as a method of re-education, as a method of improving the economic lot of the people that they are in fact persecuting and whose culture they are trying to extinguish. And I think it's really important from us at the same time as we remember the compassion that Rabbi Harris spoke so powerfully about, that we have to take every opportunity of denying the denial, of pointing out that what is happening in China is not what the Chinese government and those who apologize for them throughout the world are holding out as happening. We have to speak up and point to the truth of what is happening and show that they are denying the undeniable. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very, very important point as well to end off. And finally, Benedict Rogers, your concluding thoughts, please.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me thank you, Rabbi Kenigsberg, and everybody involved in organizing this really important event. And I look forward really to continuing to work together. Just a couple of very brief concluding thoughts. I really pay tribute to with great respect to the Jewish community for making what I know is a very rare, unusual, and sensitive comparison for you. Comparison between what's happening to the Uyghurs and the Holocaust. And I know just why that's so unusual, but the Board of Deputies and other Jewish leaders have made that comparison. And I think it's worth saying that just as while during the Holocaust, what happened to the Jewish peoples was unique and horrific, of course, many other groups were also affected by the Nazi regime's repression, people of other faith communities and other backgrounds. And I think it's worth remembering that the same thing is happening in China today. So whilst it's right that this event and our work is so focused on the genocide of the Uyghurs, let's remember also that this is part of a wider all-out crackdown by the Chinese Communist Party on everyone, on all forms of dissent, on civil society, on Christians and Falun Gong practitioners and Tibetan Buddhists and Hong Kong. And even if we don't act, we ourselves will be affected by it. The Chinese Communist Party is a threat to freedom itself. And I think that's worth remembering. And then very finally, I agree very much with Rabbi Harris's point about praying for change in the Chinese Communist Party. This year, there was a global week of prayer for China, which was largely a Catholic-driven, not exclusively, but largely a Catholic-driven initiative called by the Cardinal of Myanmar, Cardinal Charles Bo. But I hope that perhaps in coming years, in our diverse ways, we can have global weeks of prayer for change in China, for the Uyghurs in particular, but for everyone suffering under the Chinese Communist Party regime. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you all for what has been incredibly inspiring and I would say very encouraging panel as well. You know, a lot of you have mentioned the idea of hope or lack of hope, and I think just, you know, with the six of us sitting here together and hearing these messages, hearing such powerful messages from people from such diverse backgrounds and such different faiths, you know, we have this common ground. I feel encouraged that together we can act, together we hope and we pray that we can make a difference. So thank you all for everything that you're doing on this issue and for being with us tonight. That concludes the first session. We're now going to take a short 5-minute break. Do please be with us. Again, at 6:10, we'll resume with the second session, looking at political action. What can we really achieve with China?